Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Our show believes that every woman in all places and at all times should be treated with respect. Here's today's moderator, Nadia Giordana.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Nadia Giordana and I'm the moderator today on this 10th anniversary program of It's a Woman's World. Let me introduce the co-hosts, Dr. Kathryn Kelley.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here and I hope they have 10 more wonderful years.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
And Alli Naithani, you have been the host and moderator for this program since the very beginning, day one. Thank you for letting me sit in your chair today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, always.
You probably have some memories and some thoughts and things. I've only been with the show the last 4 or maybe 5 years, so I'd like to hear, and we'd like to hear, some of the memories that you have. Take it away. And this will be before we introduce our special guest for today.
All right. Well, yeah, I can't believe it's been 10 years. What a fabulous opportunity. And I have to say, big thanks to Mike Rosberg, our director, our producer of this show. It's just been an absolutely outstanding opportunity. There was a point in my life as I've evolved as a woman, and I said to myself, no more no's, and there's going to be more yeses, even if you're uncomfortable and you're afraid to take that step. And so here Mike came into my life and said, I've got this show, and he's the first one to put me on camera. And I said, no, I wanted to help him in the show that we were doing. I said, I want to be behind the camera. He said, nope, I want you in front of the camera. So that first day, that was a little different TV show, but I said, oh, okay. I think I was so frozen solid, and I had a cell phone in my pocket that I forgot to turn off. So I was worried about that the whole time, and but here we are today, and so I just owe him a big thanks, and I absolutely owe all the guests that I have learned from. It has been an incredible learning journey. I'm so glad we can bring some of the subjects that we do to the airwaves, and just meet the incredible people that we are surrounded by in this community.
Great job.
Thank you.
Oh, I agree, and it's been just in the few years that I've been with the show, it's just been great, and I've learned a lot from the guests too, so I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And we have a special guest today, Lynette Crane. Lynette, you are an author and a corporate advisor, and it's within the realms of the subject matter of extroverts, but especially about introverts and how corporations are overlooking introverts out there in that pool of employees, and a whole lot broader subject. Why don't you tell us the big primary difference between extroverts and introverts, and what really is an introvert?
I'm so glad you asked, Nadia, because there's a lot of confusion around this point. Basically, we now know that introverts are people whose brains take in more stimulation in a given situation than does the brain of an extrovert. So we tend to be a little bit overwhelmed by too much stimulation. Extrovert brains, on the other hand, are looking for stimulation to stay alert and awake. We're looking for information, and the second difference here is that the introvert brain processes information through more brain areas. So if you have a stimulus, some kind of input, that information takes a longer path through the introvert brain before a response is produced. This gives us a time delay that is very detrimental, particularly in our society. You ask a question of an introvert that the introvert does not expect, and the introvert brain is often stuffed with a lot of information. Remember, we're taking in stimulation. We also have a tendency to study a lot, to read. In a forum, an introvert forum that I was involved with on the internet, we were once asked, what's your favorite sport? And many of us said, reading. You scratch an introvert, and they're often doing a lot of deep reading, or if they're in the technical field, they're doing a lot of searching online. We have a lot of information. You shoot a question at us. We have to go through this brain processing, and we have to look through all the libraries in our brain to find an answer. And it can leave us with what I call the deer in the headlights phenomenon, where our eyes get glazed over and we panic and we don't know how to answer. And this leaves us at a distinct disadvantage in such things as group meetings, group conversations. We're often on the sidelines, not participating.
I can relate to that. I have often been accused of resisting a suggestion from someone simply because I didn't respond within a 2-second time frame. I'm processing and they're saying, you're resisting my suggestion. No, I'm not. I'm an introvert and I'm processing. But I wanted to quick, before we start in with some questions, is it still the case that introverts need their downtime to refuel their energy tanks, so to speak? I still think of it that way.
I tend to think of it more as digesting all this information because I have a small stomach, and people think I don't like to eat sometimes because I will eat a small quantity and I have to digest it before I eat more. I think we have to digest all this information that comes in, place it in the right files, come to terms with it, understand it before we jam our brains with any more information. I think simply assuming that energy comes in, I mean, what if what you're doing is processing is a lot of very stressful information? That's not going to give you energy. So we process the information and then we're ready for more.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, tell us a little bit about the work you're doing within corporate America.
Okay, first of all, introverts tend to be the last people hired because introverts do not do well in interviews for the reasons that I've just been talking about. And I'm trying to get corporations to change their hiring process. For example, they could send the questions out in advance. A candidate applies, they're qualified, they have all of the right qualifications. Why not send them the questions in advance and see what they do with them? I bet you will get more in-depth answers than you will get from someone who's glib and spontaneous. Secondly, introverts suffer because they don't match the corporate idea of a leader. They get left out of group discussions because it's a little like being with a group of kids who are playing and they're throwing a ball back and forth and it's over your head and you can never quite grab the ball. Have you ever felt like that? Yes, I have too, and you don't know how to get in on the conversation. And so people think introverts are not motivated or they're not very bright, they're not very informed, they don't speak up in meetings. And it's very easy to set up strategies to run meetings so that you involve these people that I call the quietly brilliant. Because we do know that there are more high intelligence introverts than extroverts. So they're being left out and the corporations are suffering because of that. Even when they do well, I have had so many clients who have told me, their managers have said, well, why don't you talk more? And the answer to that is, I don't have anything to say. I don't do idle chatter. I had one client who was fired recently. She had built a team that was a very successful team. They all nominated her for an award in the company, but her manager said to her, well, you're the kind of person who at a party is with a glass of wine and you're holding a deep one-on-one conversation with people instead of going around and chatting up the room. Those deep one-on-one conversations set up the deep relationships that are so meaningful, both in personal life and in professional life. She was doing just that, but she was fired. And I've seen this pattern over and over.
So in a world today where we're moving fast and coming out of, I recently came out of corporate America, and I think there is a lot of pressure in those meetings that you describe where, you know, give me a point of view, tell me what's going, speak up, you're the only leader that isn't speaking, you know, so there is that pressure. And oftentimes I think what you said, that sometimes when that introvert may be processing, that may be interpreted as, aren't you getting this? Don't you understand? And so how can we help people to overcome that? Because there is, I feel, that very distinct pressure.
Absolutely. There is that pressure, and we do live in a speeded up world. First of all, there are many companies that have a sign on the conference room wall saying, no meeting without an agenda. We need to prepare in advance, we introverts. We need to prepare our thoughts. Now, I spoke to a coach in the high-tech world, and she said, well, things move so fast, we can't do that. Well, I said, running down the hall to a meeting, can't you just text? This is the topic of the meeting. This is the subject. Is that too difficult to do? Because very often it's just a simple heads up that the introvert needs.
Well, isn't it interesting that as you're talking too, I realized that if we were going to categorize the U.S., you know, it tends to be prejudicial towards the extrovert, but I know of a number of people from other countries who have come, and I find what you're saying, one particular was doing work in health and was finding a cure for a major disease, very introverted, and had become the manager, and he found it incredibly difficult to talk with his people because they all jumped in and talked so quickly. When we as the United States then go someplace else to work in business, do other countries privilege a more slower or thoughtful or quieter approach?
There are countries. You brought up 2 points, and I'm going to address both of them. One is that there are cultural differences. There are cultures where to be a quiet, thoughtful person who reflects before you speak is highly prized. You're seen as a wise leader.
So love that word,
yes.
Wisdom, something we've forgotten to look for.
Yes, wisdom and reflection, that is highly prized, and the kind of behavior we favor in the United States is seen in a culture like that as being a little childish and a little immature. But we don't have to go to another culture to find these people. Our workplaces are loaded with people who come from those cultures now, and we're not using them effectively because we don't realize that all we have to do is set up strategies to handle these differences. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert leader, you have to have structure for a meeting. You have to let everybody know what the structure is. With introverts particularly, I tell managers to start by going to the introvert and saying, I value your input. I want you to participate in this next meeting. Will you give some thought to this? If you do this a couple of times and invite them, because we introverts have been so sidelined in our culture for so long that we're on the outskirts and we're exhausted from trying to make our voices heard. So invite the person in, and you won't have to keep doing it, but say, I value your opinion. Now, there are workplaces where one of the things they do to start a meeting is have everybody sit there for a few minutes and write their ideas down, and then they discuss them. I'm told that at Amazon, the leader of a meeting doesn't give a PowerPoint. They write an essay, bring it in, give it to everybody in the group, and everyone has to read it there. They spent the first 30 minutes of the meeting reading, and then they have a discussion. And they have a very intelligent discussion, I'm sure.
That's very unique.
Yes, it is. That's unique.
It also sounds like something that the extrovert, which I think perhaps I fall into, has to also come on board to say, I value that as well, and I value having those people speak and guide and talk and give us ideas, and so I'm going to value some of those strategies that I don't particularly need or want, but that I do want in order to value that kind of input that I'm looking for.
Yes, it's the input you want. And there are a lot of quietly brilliant leaders out there waiting to be discovered by companies who are searching frantically for leadership.
Yeah, I think though, so I just think I probably identify more as an extrovert too, but sometimes like when I hear this and I understand it and I get it and I'm learning now, but I also think being an extrovert, I love the challenge of thinking on my feet and being able to not be so prepared. And so I'm married to an introvert who likes to do research. And that just completely turns me. I think research, we just want to buy it, you know, even if it's a TV. And I'm terrible. And you know, he's really great at this. And he'll say, yeah, I got to read everything and look at it, and the patience and the time. And I think in some situations he really helps me and grounds me. But I think in other situations I'm like, let's go, let's do this, you know. And so
on vacation, that would be
like, I think so. Part of me has this, like, I can't sit back. Like, let's get into this, especially in a meeting. So can you speak to that a little bit?
It's hard to get people to slow down their thinking who are used to rapid thinking, just as it's hard to get us to speed up when we want to reflect. That's why I suggest that we put strategies in place, plans in place for running meetings, because it's the only way it's going to work. You can't get people to change their nature or the way their nervous system works but you can get them to see the sense and the logic of having a certain system for running a meeting.
Or maybe meeting somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle, yes.
And providing an equal balance by having that essay at the beginning, you kind of privilege
Yeah.
the
That's a great
introvert,
idea.
where the extroverts would be ready to jump in there and kind of go for it.
Yeah.
But now you're balancing the playing field and saying, come on and participate.
Because
Yeah.
that's what we want. And ideally, I think, as we gain more confidence and understand the other personality dimension, the opposite one from our own, I think the introverts move a little more towards the center, towards what we call ambiversion, and I think the extroverts can move a little towards the center too. And that's a healthy place to be, and I suspect it's one that involves more emotional intelligence than being at either of the extremes.
I think it does. And you know what, Lynette, since this is a program that's focused on women, I'd like to hear about your double whammy. You know what I'm talking about.
I know
Just
what
go
you're
right
talking
ahead
about.
and tell us about it.
Years ago in the 1970s, I was involved in one of the first women's studies classes in the United States, in a college class. We developed a class at City College of San Francisco, and I was one of the teachers of it. So I was into the women's movement, and then I actually did some training on gender differences in the workplace by the 1980s. The challenges, and it struck me at one point that the challenges introverts face are the same that women faced. Always being on the outskirts of the discussion. Assertiveness training, you know, was developed as part of the women's movement because women would go through graduate school and go through jobs on the outskirts while the men dominated the discussions. Well, now the same thing is true of extroverts dominating the discussions. There are a lot of similarities between these two groups of people, but really, if you are a woman and an introvert in the workplace that is basically male-oriented, I call that the double whammy effect. You're being assessed on the basis of being a woman and being found wanting in terms of your leadership qualities. You're assessed on being an introvert. Now, the really sad part of this is that for women of color, it becomes the triple whammy effect.
Absolutely, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. And do you have women who recognize that in their experiences out in the workplace, and are there any ways they can rise above that?
There are things they can do. I try to help people really maximize their talents. Introverts want to learn to be visible and powerful without becoming extroverts. I have hardly ever met an introvert who wants to be an extrovert, but we want to be respected.
Yeah. I just had thought, because I've had people tell me I never want to be like you. I thought I'm an introvert. You're the, like my friend circle, they'll say, you're the extrovert. You go do it. You know?
Well, yeah, you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and that's a pity actually that we have this antipathy towards one another. I once collected a list of words that extroverts have in their head about introverts, and another one that introverts have in their head about extroverts. And I don't think I even want to repeat these words on the air, but they're very negative, and it's so, we need yang and yin in order to be successful. Corporations need to incorporate yang and yin.
Yeah.
And there are introvert CEOs out there. It's not just an extra realm, but I assume there's more extroverts as CEOs, but introverts can become CEOs, can't they?
Introverts can, although there are many who would give me an argument, but yes, I have seen some research that I quote, and in this research, at the supervisory level, only about 15% of supervisors were introverts, and the rest were above extroverts, usually mid-level extroverts, not the extreme ones. As you moved up the managerial levels, the percentage of introverts continued to dwindle to 2% at the top. The percentage of above average extroverts also shrank, and what grew were the extreme extroverts.
Okay.
I'd say, Lynette, so I work in HR, and I've had opportunities to work with some executive level, and for the ones that are introverts, I've been lucky, I would say, to they've been open to some coaching, like before they're about to speak, or talk to a group of employees. I've often said, you know, that they're excited you're here, and they want to hear from you. If you have a funny story about something you did personally, that means, and they'll often turn to me, really? Like, yeah, they do. They want to see, and oftentimes it works. And they get up there in their speech, and you can just see the whole room relax, and then you know, so I think if in those cases, it's really worked well.
There are successful introvert leaders, and I'm interviewing them now for my upcoming book, The Introvert CEO, and they are very successful. There is a study coming out in early 2018 called the CEO Genome Project, and they were trying to study what makes a successful CEO, and they weren't necessarily looking for introverts. They were surprised to find that over 50% of successful CEOs are introverts.
Is that right?
Yes, they are. And I'm finding them in a variety of fields.
That's really.
And in society as general, the percentage of introverts is in what?
51 to 57%.
So
yes.
they're there then. We just
We're the
don't
silent
realize it.
majority. Silent majority, I call us.
One thing I was wondering about, Lynette, was, you know, we're using these labels. And so I feel like people are, you know, change. People can do things differently. People have different sort of good and bad days. Just being from the HR perspective again, when we think, oh, so I've seen managers say, well, that person will never do it. They're an introvert, or that person will be really annoying because they're an extrovert. You know, so how do we, can we be careful though about these putting these labels on people and making sure though we're not boxing them in or making prejudgments about them because people evolve and people can do different things on different days.
They do evolve, yes.
The problem is that we tend to use personality tests as labels. And yet in social psychology, we know that people change, sometimes dramatically, in response to the environment in which they're in. All of the research for decades shows that, and yet we continue to rely on personality tests to stamp a label on someone and assume that's the way they are. The sad thing about that, it really cuts both ways, is that the person who is so labeled gets stuck with that label too. I coached a woman a couple of years ago who was a CFO and introvert, you know, handling finances and so on. And at one point she broke down and confessed to me, she said, I'm really a closet I. Now an I on the DISC system is a kind of bubbly, outgoing person. She said, I'm this closet person. And she wanted to be this person, and she could have been. But she just had been told and was convinced that she was this quiet, reserved financial person. That's just part of her life. You know, if we're going to use these tests, we should look at the different dimensions and say, you know, is this appropriate in every situation, or could I be somebody different? When I start a talk, I'll ask people, how many of you are extroverts? And I'll say, how many of you think sometimes I'm one and sometimes the other? Many people raise their hands, and I say, that's a real answer. Stick with it. Just do this. Look at when you're one and when you're the other and say, why am I being that in this situation? Am I responding because it's the best response to the situation and I'm comfortable with it? Or am I doing it because I'm a little fearful and I'm being driven into this kind of personality because of the situation? Once you start to do that, you gain power. Does that help with your question?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I should tell you, Lynette, and I met you several years ago, and your original book, The Confident Introvert, is one of the books that helped me a lot along the way because I am an introvert. It's been a couple of years now since I read that. I'm so inspired now today. I need to go back and reread that before your next book comes out so that I can kind of be fully charged as I need to be as an introvert. I just wanted to get that in there, that I really got a lot out of that book, and that's the kind of book you don't just read once and tuck in a closet, especially if a person's out in especially the workaday world. It helped me a lot.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. It makes everything worth it, because laboring to produce a book, as you know, is really terrible.
You know, I must ask you, we have so much more of public performance by men, historically in business, and women working very hard to come into the business world and be equals and see us work very hard for a long time. Do you think there is a difference that weighs heavily on one or the other, that you find more women are introverts and more men are extroverts?
No.
Not at all.
The data shows maybe 1% more women. I'll tell you though, male introverts suffer too. And I think this is similar to what the women of color face, and that is for both of them, for both groups, there's a stereotype. There's a stereotype for African American women. There's a stereotype for men that they're the strong, take charge leader. And if that's your temperament, if that's your personality, that's fine. But if you are a quieter, more reserved person, if you're an introvert, and that's the stereotype against which you're measured, you are really suffering.
That makes great sense.
So
to
I
me.
get a lot of traffic on my LinkedIn site from men at middle and even upper level management levels contacting me because they're suffering.
Yeah. I know several people who have been from Asian countries, and they say, I don't like math. I'm not good at math.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks I'm going to do really well in math.
I'm one of those people. Yes, because I was, you know, people used to
You're
cheat off
supposed
of
to
my
be.
math tests, and then they realized that was not a good thing. But no, you're
Good thing.
absolutely right.
Yeah, that makes such sense.
Well, we're running close to the end of the program. Is there anything special you wanted to say before we close out the show? Anything that we didn't ask you?
Probably tons, but we don't have enough time. But you know, I'm very much interested in people's experiences with introversion. So if there's anybody out there watching this show who has a question to ask me, I would really like it if you would email me and ask the question. This helps me because I develop more and more solutions the more I know about the challenging situations that people face. So if I may give my email address now, it's Lynette, Lynette, at quietbrillianceconsulting.com. And I promise I will answer you.
We'll put it on the screen too. That is perfect.
Great.
That's a great way to end the show. Thank you for being here today, Lynette.
Thank you so much, and I'm particularly honored to be here on your 10th anniversary.
Yes, yes. And thanks, Alli and Kathryn, for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure.
And all of you out there in TV land, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Though modest in its number of days, February is a marathon. One leg of winter's slog that seems to wind on endlessly. So hard it's been, just to reach this long uphill climb, which, once trudged to its crest, a question poses. Though still miles ahead, yet within sight, might that be the course's final bend? With March's gyrations come fury and fuss. The birds who are early may alas miss the bus. But then come the crocuses brightening the scene. The white melts away, and up springs the green. Come, fill the cup, and in the fire of spring the winter garment of repentance fling. The bird of time has but a little way to fly, and lo, the bird is on the wing.